Hi, my name is Aisha. Welcome to One Elder Speaks. Should be interesting. I was driven to do my next series of videos on what I remember. I have the perspective of somebody who was born in the 60s, so really being cognizant in the 70s, 80s, and all the way up. And I'm not so addle-brained yet that I don't know what in 10 blazes is going on. So I might as well just kind of put it down for posterity so that everybody remembers. People are so rude. Their vehicles. Anyway, I remember when I was young, we were all told and believed that the current government was keeping us safe, that the American dream was alive and attainable, and that I would grow up to be a mom and a wife and have a house and a good life. And I believed in the culture and the health of the family and the right is good model. Superman and the police were on our side. I was a child and I was told what to believe. And when I became cognizant of the world outside of me, the 70s were full swing with a clamor to women's rights, gay rights, black rights. So I felt like people could and would mold the world into what we wanted it to be. And I had a lot of hope. Now, the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is back then, and I remember the sun was yellow. I didn't sun gaze, but when you looked at the sun and you looked away, the color of the sun was very much like a egg yolk. It was yellow with a little bit of orange in it, and the corona would be, white. I don't know exactly when it changed, but the current sun is white when you look at it all the way. And I looked to see on YouTube if anybody else had noticed this. And of course, I ran into videos that state, misremembered, faulty memory, myth. Okay, I know what I know. I know what I know. The sun was yellow, and that is why all the stories depicted a yellow sun. And that's why all the stories, all the children's drawings would have a yellow sun. Because it was. All throughout the 20th century, I watched the weather on the news, and the jet stream would flow from... There's a kitty cat around here? Yeah. Well, that's different. I'll definitely say hello to a kitty cat. But anyway, all throughout the 20th century, I watched the weather on the news, and I watched, for our weather specifically. So the jet stream would come across Oregon, Washington, Northern California, and travel across the country and get about in the North Dakota area and then drop like a stone and then go straight south till it hit like Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas area, and then it would level out and head east, kind of southeast, maybe heading towards north, but it was, that would be the way of it. And that was consistent. There would be some variation, but it would pretty much run that route. Now the stream of weather that we get comes out of the south and the west. So northern Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. And then it goes kind of north and east up into the northern plains area, and then it heads east. Which is really kind of the result of the tornadoes now really hitting the eastern part of the states and just... It's weird to me because it's not going back and forth or anything. It's just changed in that direction. I mean, it's no longer coming from where it was, and it's definitely going where it's never, really gone before. So the tornadoes are kind of going east of here, southeast of here. They're just, we're not getting the same tornadoes that we used to get. The wind, we don't get the wind that we used to get. Not as hard and not as sustained. It's all changed. When we do get tornadoes, they're out of season, and they're just not like they're not as prevalent, I guess, as what they used to be. I used to think that windmills would make a lot of sense for green energy in Oklahoma, but I don't feel that way anymore. We still get windy days, don't get me wrong, but nothing like we used to. And the storms, I totally miss the storms. The storms still come, but they're not as frequent and they're not as powerful as they used to be. They used to just suddenly over the horizon, you know. Anyway, the winters are definitely warmer. When I was young, there would be 3 or 4 snows a year. The snow might be in the ground for a day or two, or it may stay for a week, but we would get snow. We would also could count on like ice events, like 3 or 4 of them in the year. And again, the ice would refreeze at night, and it would stay on it'd stay around for like 3 or 4 or 5 days, which would make morning drives treacherous. But now, not so much. Like, I feel like we used to get more moisture in the winter as well, and it seems mostly dry now. And back in the day, the winds would still be present most days, so even when it wasn't very cold, it would still be bone chilling due to the wind. In November and February, we could expect either bitter cold weather or shorts weather, kind of an either or, but now these 2 months are generally warm. In recent years, we have had the occasional ice storm that is brutal and very destructive, but it'll be like one every season and wipe out a whole bunch of tree limbs and electrical lines and kind of just be kind of a fluke stuff. But the weather's not at all like we used to get on the regular, and my heating bill in the winter is not near as expensive as it used to be. And my heating system has not changed. I signed up to learn to identify and forage local plants with an older Cherokee woman. Her name was Jackie Dill. She had serious concerns regarding food insecurity affecting regular folk, and she wanted to be of assistance. She learned how to forage with her grandmother when she was young and kept the practice going throughout her life to supplement their income. And one thing she mentioned was a change that happened recently, and she was seeing plants pop up in the region that normally weren't found here, and then also some plants disappearing from this region altogether. So she acknowledged that something had changed. She also said that there used to be one growing season, but now there were 3 growing seasons in a year. I asked her if that was a bad thing, and she said yes, because the ground doesn't get a chance to lie fallow to be, enriched by decomposition and rest. I can also attest that in years past, the winter would kill the grass, and that would be the end of it. I mean, it would be yellow. But in the last 10 years at least, we've had this weird kind of low growth that is green and spring-looking, spring-like on the ground, throughout most of the winter months. She was completely correct in her assessment. Looking at the trees this fall, I felt like they weren't doing very well, but they were getting beleaguered by the sun and the weather changes. It just felt like they were not healthy and they were really struggling. We've had quite a few. There's some trees over here that look kind of like they should be evergreens, but their pine needles are the color of rust. I'm going to look into that. I'm going to do a little bit more research on what type of tree that is and whether they actually do change colors or whether this is like, whether they're just not doing well. If you look into the Inuit YouTube video, there is actually a video called, I think it's a documentary on climate change, made with the Inuit Indians of the northern climes like Alaska and Canada. Regarding their observations, they'll tell you that the winds are coming from a different direction, the stars are not being where they should be, and you'll begin to understand that it may not just be climate change that is affecting the world. There may also be some cosmological reasons for everything being different. If a solar system or a massive planet got close enough to our solar system, that could affect solar orbit patterns, and that would basically change everything. Ducks are playing. Okay. And the contrails that do not condensate. That's not what happened when airplanes from the 60s throughout the 90s at least. Back then, the contrails would follow the craft for a little ways and dissipate. Sometime in the 2000s, I started seeing the contrails that would linger in the sky and then grow wider and wider and wider. And I would notice a bunch of planes blanketing our area with their contrails, and they would crisscross the sky until a blanket of weird knot cloud would be above the city. I researched the phenomenon and figured out whatever was going on was not good. But if you notice, some days they will allow us to have blue skies, and those trails and fake clouds won't be there. But you can bet your bottom dollar that the airplanes are still running in and out of the airport on the regular. I had, posted something going, what in 10 blazes is going on? And the contrails that do not dissipate were crisscrossing the sky. And somebody said, well, that's just the airplane traffic, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, it isn't. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. So that's why I went back and just said, you have blue sky days too. They do allow that. They're allowing us to have one today. And we still have airplanes running in and out of the airport, and look at that. No, those contrails that do not dissipate. I'm not going to say the other word because I don't want to trigger nothing. In the mid-70s, I started working pretty hard, pretty busy, and I was chasing the American dream, working hard until I couldn't stand where I worked anymore, putting in applications to find something that paid more, working hard until I couldn't stand where I was working anymore, getting sick because the stress was stressing me out, getting fired and collecting unemployment, putting in an application to find something else, etc. So when I try to go back and remember exactly when I started noticing things, it is difficult. I mean, they sucked up our entire days. And your weekend days were, sucked up with doing everything that you couldn't get done during the weekdays. It's really difficult to pinpoint when all these things began to happen. I was definitely on the treadmill and desperate to hold and keep a job, desperate to hold and keep the apartment, scared to death of not being able to maintain status quo. Now, my mother's generation basically found jobs and stayed with these jobs with the idea that they would retire from these companies and be able to live the good life. The company would have picnics and Christmas parties to try and foster a family atmosphere. Many towns and manufacturing facilities, as well as service industries. So, many towns had manufacturing facilities and service industries, so everyone had an opportunity to work. At some point, corporations started taking over, changing the nature of business in the U.S. The corporations were conglomerates competing with smaller businesses who didn't have their purchasing power nor the resources of the corporations, and they would diversify their portfolios by purchasing smaller businesses and changing the nature of business completely. These corporations had an eye always to fatten the stockholder and management at the expense of everybody else. I saw these corporations begin to offer less benefits, less vacations, less time off, eradicate pensions and profit sharing, etc. The corporations began offering 401ks, saying this is better, but we all know the stock market is a gambling venture based solely on the confidence of the world in the American dollar. The market can change on a dime. The only people who can play in the stock market and win consistently are people who have bunches of money to play with and friends in high places to give a nudge and a word when to buy or sell. The rest of us are on our own. In the early 80s, healthcare looked good for a short time. I had an affordable option called an HMO until the insurance companies came in and took over the healthcare field. So every year, the corporations would negotiate with the cheapest healthcare options available. So for the regular worker, when the only option was to change the insurance company, and by default, your doctors and hospitals, every year or two, so you never get quality, affordable healthcare ever again. Staying with the same doctor over time would be out of network and too expensive. Every year, the corporations would pay less and less of the premiums, and every year or so, the workers would have to pick up the slack. The process induced stress every year, waiting to see how the latest insurance would screw you over. It's a brutal system for humans to endure. When Reagan was in office, which would have been the 1980s, we saw the wholesale destruction of restrictions and regulations in regards to corporations, insurance companies, lobbying, Wall Street, and the banking institutions. We also witnessed the decimation of the power of the working class American and unions. The war on drugs was escalated, which led to police agencies gaining a lot of funding through drug seizures, which funded the militarization of the police and led to the privatization of prisons in the United States. The Iran-Contra affair made some headlines, but ultimately the president and implicated officials faced little or no consequences for this breach of consciousness. Naturally, the Bush senior years further championed the cause of catering to big money, big business, and the military-industrial complex. In the 1990s, I had hopes with Bill Clinton as president, But I realized, with time, that although I was doing better financially, this president was no more for the working man than the other two that preceded him. During this time, I was still struggling to live my American dream because I still believed it was possible. I put my head down and I worked hard and played hard. And in the latter part of the 90s, I read The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Let me repeat this. Everybody needs to read this. It's The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Z like in zebra, I-N-N. And I finally shook the glitter and the propaganda out of my eyes. And I really began to pay attention and to question everything that I was seeing. When the U.S. wanted something from an unwilling third world country, which, this has been going on forever, by the way, the CIA or whatever secret, society or secret, I don't know, group of people working for, whatever. Anyway, secret guys would attempt to find dissenting political aspirants to bolster up in these third world countries, oust the current regime and set up a puppet government that would, yes men them, buy drugs, sell military wear, use that country's resources and people until they're all used up, abandon the puppet government, pull any support, and run home. As you can see, nothing has changed. That is still the way that the United States runs international affairs. The Bush Jr. years were more of the same agenda of big money and corporations over people. No shock there. But the response to 9/11 confused me initially and then pissed me off. There's no reason to go to war in Iraq, none whatsoever, and I didn't for a minute buy the weapons of mass destruction horseshit. Sure enough, I was correct, and that was all about oil. In the 2000s, I ended up at a mid-level valve company and worked my way up from general office to planning and purchasing. It was there that I really started becoming aware of corporations and corporate practices. I'm going to end this right here and move on. Thank you for listening. So I went ahead and had to end that abruptly. Somebody showed up and, it's just disturbing. Anyway, there's a little bit more traffic noise over here, but that's okay. I'm only going to be over here for a while. And I will wrap up part 1 of what I remember, and we're going to step into part 2 in the next video. I appreciate y'all sticking with me. Talk to you later.